were showing positive growth. Clearly the LCD TV market was very strong in 2011 for a whole 2010 for a whole variety of reasons. You had analog switch-offs going across, particularly in Europe. You had subsidy programs happening in Japan and to some extent in China, really driving demand very strongly. Plus, coupled with the fact that it's still a booming market. But other product categories, again, part of this is bounced back from 29. So desktop PC, clearly you'd expect quite a significant bounce back compared to 29. Plus, you had all-in-one PCs really making a showing for the first time, and that did provide a boost to the desk PC market. But a variety of markets showing positive growth. The real distinguishing factor what we now are seeing in 2011 is that a much more consistent trend of most product categories slowing down or going into contraction, with very few exceptions. And really there's two major exceptions, tablet PCs and smartphones, really sucking up consumer spending, no matter what regional market you're in. Mobile PC, which is notebooks plus netbooks, actually still pretty strong, and we forecast it to be still pretty strong even for next year. But there are some big regional gaps opening up there to explain that. We'll talk about some of the other categories a little bit later on, but pretty significant shift in kind of spending patterns. And no real change for 2012, I think. Clearly, the growth rates for tablet PC and smartphones are coming down because they have to come down. If you're having explosive growth rates of over 200% for tablet PC, is really its first full year on the market, then it's going to be slowing down. But it's still pretty impressive. And even for smartphones, you are reaching very high level of penetration in developed markets, and that's beginning to show in the overall revenue growth numbers. Okay, yeah, that's good for now. Okay, I'll let Steve talk about this one, because you can't see any of this, can you?
Yeah, the numbers are quite small, but the shares are quite small. There are decimal points between a lot of these digits. So these are a lot of these categories that you can see listed here on the right side of the screen are small. And there may be some surprises to you. Plasma TV, but in terms of their overall share of the global market across these various years, we're talking like less than, in most cases, less than 2%. Then we have another category, which is really a mixed bag of other accessories like related technologies and a handful of others. But taken in aggregate, you can see across the top that the aggregate share, and it's really illustrated quite nicely by these bars, in aggregate, this collection of other technologies, which is really an abundance of them, is getting less and less and less. So as tablets, mobile connected devices claim more and more. One interesting thing here is with regard to a couple of these that you see some potential upside possibility. Video games console. Many of you have heard that Nintendo will be showing the Wii U behind closed doors at CES this year. Obviously that's going to be probably an E3 story. But I think that we may see some of these shares improve a little bit. They'll remain in this category, however, but just some upside potential. Inkjet cartridges and just the whole printer category in general has kind of had an amazing resilience to extinction, if you will. We think about who prints anymore today. We're sharing stuff via email and the like, but these are some categories that are going to be with us. And in fact, when you study this data year in and year out, like Steve and I do, you see a number of examples of product categories that have an amazing lifespan. I can say that at CEA we're constantly asked, when is about VCRs, for example. Well, nobody owns that anymore. Actually, people do. Even though our industry isn't selling them, a number of companies may still be supporting them, or people still own it. It's this legacy content that's driving that ownership. Steve?
Yeah, I was going to. One of the one of the other points to make about this one is that, no surprise, that one of the things that the rush into smartphones has done has really squeezed many other portable device categories. So many of these smaller categories that are shrinking here are those. So car navigation, camcorders even, portable media players, MP3 devices, essentially. All of those, are kind of losing their relevance as the smartphone, takes over those functionalities. And they are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. You could say the same with digital cameras. Actually, if you saw the earlier slide, digital camera spending on digital cameras was pretty resilient, at about 4% of total spending. And you perhaps should be asking yourself why that is. If you segment the market, because we don't really focus on that in this presentation, but if you segment that market, the compact camera segment is clearly shrinking in terms of its ability to generate retail revenue. And that is the part of the market where the smartphone is able to take over. On the other side, the DSLR market is very resilient and growing. And as I heard Sean just talking about at the end of his presentation, the compact system or mirrorless segment is also kind of slotting into that high-end sort of bracket, or middle to high-end bracket. And I think that's where the kind of lesson is for many other device categories. The only way that they can actually survive and have any ongoing future is if they actually do migrate more towards the high end of performance, where realistically a smartphone is never going to be able to take quite the same quality of image. So for normal day-to-day use, the smartphone is clearly going to be the device of choice for most different activities. And it's really going to be, I think Sean was saying, prosumer or professional use. It's going to drive those categories going forwards. Okay, we need to move on, I guess. Am I talking about this one? Okay.
Yeah, I think you were.
So, I mean, the other sort of point I wanted to make is that the different shape of different regional markets is also changing the overall global shape of markets. So you can see here that in developed markets, the level of spending that goes into all of these smaller device categories, which is the grey bars, is relatively high. And most people in their households have all of those devices, or have had historically. But if you look at emerging markets, many of them, they don't. Those markets are much less developed, and to a large extent, these markets are leapfrogging directly over those markets. So because smartphone growth is so high in emerging Asia, Middle East and Africa, we've all heard the stories of how the smartphone is revolutionizing life in Africa, where most homes don't even have electricity, but they can have a charging point for a smartphone somewhere in the village. That's enabling them to do things which they could never do. And they don't have a need for a digital camera, which they can't charge, or any other device which they cannot use in their home anyway. So it's concentrating spending into the very big product categories. And I think that's very critical. And that's really helping to shift that global spending towards these major categories.
Is Ultrabook any of those?
Well, no, it's not direct. Ultrabook is classed within mobile PC.
Okay.
I mean, just to make a quick point on that, in terms of, not talking about the US now, but in terms of all the other markets we track globally, Ultrabook still accounts for less than 1% of the market. And its highest penetration so far is Japan. And still, that's around 3 to 4%. So, very early days for Ultrabook. I understand we're going to see a lot of Ultrabooks at CES, and I guess this is going to be the kind of big test over 2012 as to whether Ultrabook can kind of catch on. But so far, hasn't made a big impact.